Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. It is Monday, February 9, 2026.
Good morning.
I was just looking at the stack of research we have on the desk today, and I had to just take a second to breathe.
I know that feeling.
Because if you feel like the world is spinning a little faster than it used to,
Yeah.
like the news cycle has gone from a jog to a full-on sprint,
Yeah.
you are definitely not alone.
Oh, it's not just a sprint. It's a Monday morning where the future isn't just knocking on the door. It's kicking it down.
Kicking it down is right.
Yeah.
I usually try to find a nice, tidy theme for these deep dives, the week in politics or
Yeah.
state of the climate.
Sure.
But today, the only theme that fits is sci-fi is now.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean that as some kind of buzzword. I mean, we are looking at documents today detailing literal self-growing cities on the moon.
It sounds like a headline from a movie.
It does. And we have research on synthetic skin that mimics octopuses to make things invisible. And then, just to top it off, we have data showing that massive forests, entire ecosystems, are physically getting up and moving north.
Yeah, the world is in hyper transition, and what's so fascinating about today's stack is the contrast.
How so?
Well, we're going to spend time talking about this hyper advanced technology like, AI agents that are practicing law autonomously.
Right.
But we're juxtaposing that with a return to these very ancient, very primal human behaviors. We're finding Neolithic mass graves that redefine our history of violence, and at the same time, we're seeing modern nations fight over territory using 5,000-year-old tactics right alongside drone swarms.
It is a lot to process. So, okay, here is the mission for this deep dive. We're going to try to cut through some of that noise.
We have to.
We aren't just going to list headlines. We're going to unpack the implications. Why does a drone with this new kind of engine change the balance of power? Why does a break-in Olympic medal, of all things, tell us something about global manufacturing?
We're looking for the signal in all that noise.
Exactly. So here is the roadmap. We are starting in space because Elon Musk has made a huge pivot regarding the moon that basically changes the timeline for humanity off-world.
It really does.
Then we're going deep into tech biomimicry, AI lawyers. Then we have a heavy reality check on the climate, specifically about methane leaks and those wandering forests you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
After that, we'll dig into archaeology, global conflict updates, and unfortunately, the news from Ukraine and the Middle East is significant. And finally, we'll wrap it up with the culture wars that are hitting the Winter Olympics and the Super Bowl.
And let's just say the Super Bowl and the Olympics both provided some very strange metaphors for the current moment.
Absolutely. Broken metals and AI hallucinations.
You can't make it up.
You can't. But let's start with the biggest pivot of the week, the new space race. For the last decade, if you asked anyone in the aerospace industry what the ultimate goal was, they would have screamed Mars at you.
Oh, Mars was the religion. It was the Holy Grail, no question.
But suddenly, it feels like the scripture has changed. There is a new destination at the top of the list.
That's right. Elon Musk and SpaceX have officially announced a strategic shift. The new immediate priority is a self-growing city on the moon.
A self-growing city.
Yeah. And to be clear, this isn't some stopover on the way to Mars. This is the main event for the foreseeable future.
That sounds incredibly ambitious.
Yeah.
But also, why the change? Musk has been the Mars guy for 20 years. Is he giving up on the red planet?
He's not giving up, but he is pushing that colonization horizon back, and pretty significantly. We're now looking at 20 years, maybe more, for Mars.
Wow.
The pivot to the moon, well, it's driven by cold, hard logistics. Musk is an engineer at heart, right? And when you look at the orbital mechanics, the moon is simply a better staging ground. It just makes more sense.
Okay, walk us through that math. Because to a layperson like me, space is just far away.
Yeah.
What is the actual difference between a moon mission and a Mars mission in terms of logistics?
It all comes down to two things: the launch window and the travel time.
Okay.
To get to Mars, using any current propulsion technology, you are completely beholden to what's called the home and transfer orbit.
Right, where the planets align just so.
Exactly. And that perfect alignment between Earth and Mars only happens once every 26 months.
So if you miss your bus, you're waiting over 2 years for the next one.
You got it. And the bus ride itself takes 6 to 9 months.
One way.
One way. Now imagine you are trying to build a city which requires millions of tons of cargo, thousands of people, constant resupply missions. That 2-year gap is a logistical nightmare.
I can't even imagine if a critical life support system breaks on Mars and you don't have the spare part.
Everyone dies. They're all dead before the next resupply window even opens.
The stakes are just Absolutely.
Incredibly high. Now, look at the moon.
Okay.
It is 3 days away.
That's a long weekend.
It effectively is. And the launch windows for a lunar trajectory, they open up practically every 10 days, depending on the specific orbit you want.
So you can set up a constant conveyor belt of supply ships.
Precisely. You can rotate crews. You can fix your mistakes. It allows for rapid iteration, which has always been the SpaceX philosophy.
You test, break, fix, repeat. You can't do that on Mars.
You can't. But, we have to look at the subtext here, too. This isn't just Musk deciding the moon is a better practice field. This is geopolitical. The moon is becoming the new high ground in a very, very literal sense.
Because the U.S. isn't the only one eyeing the lunar South Pole.
Oh, far from it. We are seeing a massive acceleration from the China National Space Administration, the CNSA, and from Roscosmos in Russia. They've already announced the International Lunar Research Station.
So they're planning a permanent presence.
Permanent habitation, yeah. So Musk pivoting to the moon is, in a way, the U.S. private sector locking shields with American national interests.
It's the privatization of the space race.
That's exactly what it is. The U.S. government is relying on SpaceX to be the counterweight to China's state-run program.
Yeah.
If SpaceX wasn't going to the moon, the U.S. might essentially cede that territory and all the resources, like water ice, to China.
And speaking of that U.S.-China dynamic, let's move from rockets to the atmosphere. There was a story out of the Nanjing University of Aeronautics this week that really caught my attention. We talk a lot about the F-35 being the pinnacle of air superiority, right?
Yeah.
But this new development seems to challenge that whole assumption.
It challenges the entire doctrine of air combat. The researchers at Nanjing have successfully flight tested a new thrust vectoring device, and it's specifically designed for drones.
Okay, for the listeners who aren't aviation engineers, let's break down thrust vectoring. I know the F-22 Raptor has it. What does it actually do?
Right. So in a standard plane, you turn by moving flaps on the wings and the ailerons and rudder. You're relying on airflow over those surfaces to change your direction.
Okay, standard physics.
Thrust vectoring is totally different. You are actually moving the nozzle of the jet engine itself. You're pointing the explosion, the thrust, in a different direction.
So you can literally push the tail of the plane around using the engine's power, not just the wind.
Precisely. And it allows an aircraft to perform maneuvers that just defy standard aerodynamics. You can essentially drift in the sky. You can point the nose of the plane at a target while you're flying sideways. It allows for incredibly tight turns, what pilots call high angle of attack maneuvers.
And usually this is heavy, complex, expensive hydraulic machinery.
Incredibly heavy. And it's a nightmare for maintenance. That's why you only see it on the most expensive manned fighters.
Yeah.
But the Chinese innovation here is that they've simplified it. They've made a lightweight mechanical system that you can just bolt onto a drone.
And this is where it gets scary for the F-35 pilots, right?
Yeah.
Because a drone doesn't have a squishy human inside it that has to worry about G-forces.
That is the crux of it. A human pilot, even in a G-suit, starts to pass around 9 Gs. You black out, you crash.
That's the story.
A drone doesn't care about G-force. It can pull 15, 20 Gs. If you combine that structural resilience with thrust vectoring, you suddenly have an aircraft that can literally fly circles around a manned fighter.
It can dodge missiles in ways a human pilot simply cannot process or physically endure.
That's right. It just moves in a way that's impossible for a human. It sounds like we are moving toward a future where the best pilot in the world, the Top Gun, loses to a mid-tier algorithm simply because of physics.
That's the direction of travel. We are looking at swarm tactics where maneuverability beats stealth every time.
So sobering stuff.
Yeah. And while we are looking up at the sky, we also have a stack of rapid-fire discoveries from deep space. It feels like every week we find out that our textbooks are basically outdated.
It's been a particularly bad week for the old textbooks.
He chuckles.
Let's run through them. First up, Venus.
Ah, the hell planet.
Yeah.
900 degrees, sulfuric acid rain. Not a great vacation spot.
And now, potentially, underground real estate. A new analysis of old NASA, that's the National Aeronautics and Space Administration radar data, suggests there are vast ancient lava tubes beneath the surface.
We see these in Hawaii, right, where lava flows, the top hardens, the lava inside drains out, and it leaves a tunnel.
Exactly the same principle, but on Venus, the scale is likely massive. And this changes the conversation about exploration.
How so?
We've always assumed Venus is uninhabitable because the surface pressure just crushes you and the heat melts lead. But inside one of those lava tubes, you are shielded from the radiation. The temperature might be much more stable.
So it's still hellish, but it at least provides a foothold.
It's a bunker on a planetary scale, a very hot bunker.
Right.
Next up, the moon's interior. The Chinese Tianzhi-6 mission brought back samples from the far side of the moon, the side that always faces away from us.
Which is geologically very different from the near side we always see.
Very different. And the chemical analysis of these new samples shows signatures of extreme cataclysmic heat.
Meaning what, exactly?
It suggests a massive ancient impact. Something huge hit the moon billions of years ago, and it didn't just make a crater. It essentially cracked the moon open and resurfaced the entire far side with molten rock.
So it's a really violent history. It wasn't just a passive accumulation of dust over eons.
No, it was a constant bombardment. And then there is Uranus.
Ah, poor Uranus. Always the punchline.
Always. But we might owe it an apology. For 40 years, our entire understanding of Uranus's magnetosphere, its protective magnetic bubble, came from one flyby, Voyager 2, back in 1986.
And the data was weird. I remember that.
Super weird. The magnetic field was off-center. It was wobbling. It just didn't make any sense based on our models.
And scientists have been trying to explain that weirdness for decades.
And it turns out the model was probably fine. The timing was just terrible. A new study shows that Voyager 2 flew by just a few days after a massive solar wind event.
Oh, no.
Yeah. The sun had essentially hammered Uranus with plasma, compressing its magnetosphere and making it look all distorted.
So we caught it on its absolute worst day.
We walked in on it while it was having the flu. Under normal conditions, Uranus is likely much more standard.
And why is that important?
It's important because it means its moons like Titania and Oberon might actually orbit inside the magnetic shield most of the time, which makes them much better candidates for having subsurface oceans.
That's huge for the hunt for life. One data point can skew a whole generation of science if you don't know the context.
Context is everything. And finally, a quick note on dark matter. There is a new paper floating a pretty controversial theory.
Okay.
It suggests that the supermassive black hole at the center of our galaxy isn't actually a black hole.
Sagittarius A. What else would it be?
Yes. The theory suggests it might be a dense concentration of dark matter that just mimics the gravitational pull of a black hole but doesn't have an event horizon.
That's a mind bender.
It's highly theoretical, of course, but it just shows how little we still understand about the 85% of the universe that is completely invisible to us.
It certainly keeps the astronomers humble. Okay, let's bring it back down to the atmosphere, or rather into the lab. Section 2, technology. And we are starting with octopuses.
Well, cephalopods are the ultimate engineers. Researchers at Penn State have been trying to crack the code of active camouflage, and they've developed something they're calling a smart synthetic skin.
I feel like we've seen color-changing materials before, e-ink, that sort of thing. What makes this different?
It's the texture. An octopus doesn't just change its color to look like a rock. It changes its skin to feel like a rock. It grows little bumps and ridges almost instantly.
Right.
This new material is a hydrogel that is electronically programmable to do exactly that.
So how does a hydrogel grow a bump on command? That sounds like magic.
It's about manipulating the internal structure of the polymer network. When you apply a specific voltage, the material expands or contracts in specific zones. So you can have a totally flat sheet of this skin, hit a switch, and suddenly it has the texture of gravel or braille or even a keyboard.
Okay, so military camouflage is the obvious use case. A tank that looks and feels like a sand dune.
The military applications are vast, absolutely. But think about the consumer side for a second. We're all obsessed with touchscreens, these flat, cold pieces of glass. Imagine a phone screen that can physically raise buttons when you need to type, so you can actually feel the keys under your fingers, and then they just disappear back into the screen when you're watching a video.
That is very Minority Report. It completely blurs the line between hardware and software.
It makes software physical, and that's a huge shift in how we think about interface design.
Speaking of software, let's talk about the software that is currently eating the world, artificial intelligence. But we're looking at a specific sector today, the law.
This is one of the most disruptive frontiers for AI right now. We're seeing the rise of what are being called AI agents in the legal profession.
And what's the difference between an agent and a tool like ChatGPT?
It's a key distinction. A tool waits for you to ask a question. An agent is given a goal, say, research all the case law on this topic and draft a motion to dismiss. And it goes off and does the whole series of tasks required to achieve it on its own.
It loops. It critiques its own work. It keeps trying.
Exactly, it's autonomous,
Right.
and this is causing an existential crisis in law firms. The junior associate, the person who spends 80 hours a week reading through discovery documents, is being replaced by a server farm.
But is that even legal? I mean, can an AI actually practice law?
That is the billion-dollar question, isn't it? There are massive ethical concerns. We've already seen cases where an AI hallucinates and just makes up fake legal precedents.
Oh, I've read about that.
So if an AI agent files a motion based on a case that never even happened, who's liable? The lawyer who clicked run, the software company.
And yet the money is pouring in regardless.
It's a complete gold rush. Benchmark just raised $225 million to back Cerebras, a hardware company building chips specifically for this kind of AI.
Wow.
And in a move that I think just perfectly sums up the hype cycle we're in, Crypto.com just bought the domain name AI.com for $70 million.
$70 million
70?
for a URL.
It's a branding land grab. They want to be the front door of the internet for artificial intelligence. Whether that pays off or not, we'll see. But it shows the level of capital that is just sloshing around.
But it's not all free markets and exuberance.
Uh-huh.
The regulators are finally waking up. I saw the EU is taking a shot at TikTok.
And this is a very significant move. The European Union is launching an investigation into TikTok, but it's not just for content moderation, which is the usual fight. They are targeting addictive design.
What does that mean, legally speaking?
They are looking at the mechanics of the app itself, the infinite scroll, the autoplay feature, the things that are specifically engineered to exploit human psychology and keep you on the app for hours.
Okay.
The EU is arguing that this constitutes a harm to users, particularly to minors.
So they are treating the interface design like a public health hazard, sort of like putting nicotine in cigarettes to make them more addictive.
That is the perfect analogy. And the penalties are real. They are threatening fines of up to 6% of global turnover. For a company like ByteDance, that is billions of dollars.
It's a huge warning shot to the entire tech industry.
It is. The message is, stop hacking our brains.
And while we're talking about hacking, let's talk about hacking the planet. Solar geoengineering. This used to be fringe science, something you'd see in a sci-fi movie, but now the venture capitalists are getting involved.
It's moving from theoretical emergency brake to startup business plan. The concept is actually pretty simple. You inject sulfur dioxide or other reflective particles into the stratosphere.
Right.
They reflect a small percentage of sunlight back into space, cooling the planet.
It mimics a large volcanic eruption.
Exactly. Mount Pinatubo cooled the Earth by about 0.5 degrees Celsius when it erupted in the 90s. The problem is you now have startups like Make Sunsets that are accepting private funding to do this. And they're doing it without any international permission or regulation.
This feels like the ultimate tragedy of the commons. If a startup in Mexico shoots sulfur into the air to cool down the planet, they don't control where that cooling happens, do they?
No, not at all. And that is the incredible danger. You might cool down the global average temperature, but in doing so, you could completely disrupt the Indian monsoon.
Oh my God.
You could cause a drought in the Amazon. You could destroy the progress we've made on the ozone layer recovery. The atmosphere is a chaotic system. Scientists are screaming that we need global governance before some billionaire decides to unilaterally dim the sun.
It's terrifying because it's so cheap to do. You don't need $1 trillion. You just need a few million and some high-altitude weather balloons.
Exactly. It's asymmetrical. One actor can affect the entire planet.
Which brings us to Section 3, the planet itself. Because while we are debating whether to hack the climate is already physically reshaping the Earth. And I mean that literally. The forests are walking.
This is a story that really highlights the sheer scale of the change we're seeing. Data from NASA and the Landsat program is showing that the boreal forests, that massive ring of trees around the northern hemisphere, are shifting northward.
How fast are we talking about here?
In geological terms, it's a sprint. We are seeing a 12% expansion into what used to be tundra. As the temperatures rise, the tree line, the point where it's just too cold for trees to grow, is marching toward the pole.
Now, intuitively, my first thought is, more trees is good. Trees soak up carbon. Isn't this just a natural carbon capture solution?
You would think so, but the Arctic is tricky. It all comes down to something called the albedo effect.
Okay.
Snow and ice are bright white. They reflect most of the sun's heat back into space, like a mirror.
Right.
Trees are dark green. They absorb heat.
So if you replace a bright white snowfield with a dark green forest,
You turn a reflector into a heat sponge. The planet absorbs more solar energy, which warms the Arctic even faster, which melts more snow, which allows more trees to grow. It's a positive feedback loop that actually accelerates the warming.
it's so complex. We try to fix one variable and we just end up breaking another.
The Earth is a system of systems. And speaking of systems, we have new data on methane.
Right.
We launched a satellite called MethaneSat specifically to track leaks from oil and gas fields.
And the report card is in.
It's a fail, a big one. The first batch of data focuses on the Permian Basin in the U.S. and the Weighty Basin in Iraq. And it shows that actual methane emissions are 50% higher than what the companies and governments have been reporting.
50%. That is not a rounding error. Yeah. That's, well, is it fraud? Or just bad measurement?
It's probably a mix of both. The monitoring was pretty sporadic before. Now, with satellites, there's nowhere to hide.
And methane is so much more potent than CO2.
Oh, yeah. It's 80 times more potent at trapping heat in the short term. So if we're undercounting it by 50%, our climate models are way too optimistic.
That is a very sobering thought. And we are already seeing the biological fallout from all this. We have stories about ecosystems colliding in strange ways.
Yeah, down in Patagonia, we have what should be a conservation success story. The puma population is recovering.
Right.
But because of habitat shifts and changes in their usual prey, the pumas have started hunting Magellanic penguins.
I'm sorry, pumas eating penguins. That sounds like something from a cartoon.
It's a clash of biomes. You have a mountain predator meeting a coastal flightless bird. The penguins have no evolutionary defense against a big cat. It just shows how climate change is scrambling the map. Species are meeting that should never, ever meet.
And it's happening in the ocean, too. The coral reefs.
The Staghorn Coral Study, this is a critical piece of research. It shows what's called the multiple stressor effect.
Go on.
Biology is resilient. Coral can survive a heat wave. It can survive a disease outbreak. But right now, we are hitting them with heat, with ocean acidification, and with disease all at the same time.
It's like getting the flu, breaking your leg, and losing your job all in the same day.
At a certain point, the system just collapses. That's the danger of the current moment. It's the cumulative stress.
Is there any good news in the biology section at all?
A glimmer. There's a new study on plankton evolution right after the dinosaur extinction, the KPG event. It shows that life bounces back with incredible speed. Evolution basically went into overdrive to fill all the empty niches in the ocean.
So life finds a way. It just might not be us.
Life is durable. Civilizations are fragile.
That is a perfect segue to Section 4, archaeology. Because we are learning that our very definition of civilization might be wrong.
This is fascinating work coming out of China from the Liangzhu site.
Mm-hmm.
For a long time, Western archaeology had this very specific checklist for what counted as a civilization. You needed bronze, and you needed writing.
Right, if you didn't have writing, you were just a culture or a chiefdom.
Exactly. But Liangzhu challenges that. It blows it out of the water, really. This site is 5,000 years old. They had a massive, sophisticated hydraulic engineering system, dams, levees, reservoirs that manage water for a huge population. And they did it all without a written language.
So they were master engineers before they were writers.
That's it. It suggests that complex social organization, the ability to mobilize thousands of workers for a huge public works project, doesn't require a bureaucracy of scribes. It requires a different kind of social glue. It's forcing us to rewrite the timeline of human complexity.
But before we get too romantic about our ancient, complex ancestors, we have to talk about the find in France, the Neolithic mass graves.
This is the dark side of that complexity. Archaeologists in northeastern France found graves from the Neolithic period that show clear evidence of victory rituals.
Victory rituals sounds like a euphemism for something pretty terrible.
It is. We are not just talking about battle casualties here. We are talking about systematic executions and public displays of violence after the battle was over. They found severed arms that were likely taken as trophies.
So much for the peaceful, noble, savage idea from that era.
Violence, unfortunately, seems to be a feature, not a bug, of organized human groups. It goes back as far as we can dig.
Which brings us, sadly, to the present day, Section 5, global affairs. Because the themes of territory, resources, and violence are very much alive in 2026. Let's start with Ukraine. Day 1,445.
It is a grinding, brutal war of attrition. President Zelensky is pleading for more air defense systems because the Russian strategy is to relentlessly hammer the energy grid, especially as winter continues. But there is a new internal threat that is seriously undermining the war effort: corruption.
The embezzlement scandal.
Yes. A number of Ukrainian generals were exposed in a $5.7 million scheme involving a command and control software system. This system was supposed to help coordinate troops on the battlefield. Instead, the money just vanished.
That has to be absolutely devastating for morale on the front lines.
It's poison. When soldiers are dying for lack of resources and then they find out the generals are buying villas in Spain, it's catastrophic. Meanwhile, looking over at Russia, the complete economic collapse that the West predicted, it hasn't happened.
Their gold reserves are at a record high, I saw.
Over $402 billion in gold. Russia has successfully built a fortress economy. They've decoupled from the dollar as much as possible and insulated themselves with hard assets. It just shows the limits of sanctions when a country has vast natural resources to fall back on.
Let's pivot to the U.S.-China tension. There is a very disturbing accusation floating around regarding nuclear testing.
This is very high-stakes poker. The U.S. State Department has formally accused China of conducting secret, low-yield nuclear tests at their Lochner site back in June of 2020.
China denies it, obviously.
Vehemently. But the accusation itself damages the trust required for any kind of arms control. If the major powers are secretly testing weapons again, the nuclear taboo is starting to fray.
And that tension is spilling over into the Arctic. We mentioned Greenland earlier.
It's getting crowded up there. Canada and France are opening new consulates in Greenland.
When now, though?
It's a defensive diplomatic move. You remember when the Trump administration floated the idea of buying Greenland?
I do.
Well, that scared a lot of our allies. They are planting their flags diplomatically to say, we are here, and this is not just an American real estate deal. Greenland controls the GIUK gap, the strategic gateway to the Atlantic. It's critical territory.
Moving to the Middle East, the situation on the Israel-Lebanon border, the Blue Line, seems to be deteriorating.
We are seeing what can only be described as scorched earth tactics. There are reports of herbicide spraying to destroy vegetation.
Why?
The stated military goal is to clear lines of sight to prevent ambushes, but the result is the destruction of agriculture and livelihoods for the local population. It creates a wasteland.
And diplomatically, the U.S. and Iran seem to be stuck in a loop.
It's bipolar diplomacy. They held talks in Oman regarding the nuclear program, which were called a good beginning by both sides. And then, almost immediately, the U.S. Treasury issued a whole new round of sanctions against Iranian entities.
The carrot and the stick, but mostly stick.
It sends a very confusing message. It's hard to build any kind of momentum when you are shaking hands with one hand and signing sanctions with the other.
Domestically here in the U.S. and over the U.K., the ghost of Jeffrey Epstein continues to haunt the political class.
New documents were released this week, and again, we have to be really responsible here. Being named in a document isn't a conviction. But the names are significant. Peter Mandelson in the UK, a major figure in the Labour Party, and continued inquiries and mentions regarding President Trump.
It just feels like a story that will never have a clean ending.
It won't, because the network of influence was so vast and so international. It reveals this nexus of money, power, and exploitation that the public is just deeply, deeply cynical about.
Speaking of public cynicism in politics, immigration. The ICE raids in Maine are causing a political earthquake.
This is a fascinating bit of political calculus. Maine is a key swing state for Senate control. Republicans need to hold that seat.
Right.
But these aggressive immigration and customs enforcement raids are triggering a massive backlash among the locals who see their neighbors and coworkers being taken away. It's hurting the GOP brand in a place where they desperately need every vote.
And it even sparked protests in Milan, of all places.
At the Winter Olympics, yes. Protesters there targeted the U.S. diplomatic security agents, some of whom were ICE agents, who were there protecting the American delegation. It shows that domestic policy doesn't stay domestic anymore. The world is watching.
Which brings us to our final section, culture and sports. The 2026 Winter Olympics in Milan Cortina. It started with a bang.
It started with Zlatan Ibrahimovic.
The soccer player. What was he doing at the Winter Olympics?
He was the hype man for the opening ceremony. He gave this speech that was pure Zlatan. Why be normal when you can be the best?
I mean, he's not wrong, but the games themselves have been, well, chaotic.
High drama. Lindsey Vonn, in her miracle comeback attempt, crashed just 13 seconds into her run.
That was so hard to watch.
It was heartbreaking. But then her teammate, Breezy Johnson, steps up and wins the gold. It's the agony and the ecstasy of sport, all in one afternoon.
But the real story, The weird story is the metals themselves.
They are breaking.
I can't believe this.
Yes. We have athletes winning gold, the biggest moment of their lives. They drop the medal during the celebration, and it physically snaps or chips. There's a major manufacturing defect.
It feels like a metaphor for 2026.
It really does. We can design a self-growing city on the moon. We can make synthetic skin that turns invisible, but we can't cast a durable piece of metal for an Olympic ceremony.
It highlights the fragility of our global supply chains and quality control.
Absolutely.
And we had the Super Bowl yesterday, Super Bowl 60. The Seattle Seahawks took down the New England Patriots.
A great game. But the commercials were the real cultural barometer this year. It was the AI Super Bowl.
It was everywhere. Svedka Vodka, the AI company, Anthropic.
It marks the complete normalization of AI. Just 2 years ago, AI was this scary, abstract threat. Now, it's selling you vodka. That is how technology integrates into society. It goes from being the Terminator to being in a beer commercial.
And the halftime show. Bad Bunny, Lady Gaga, Cardi B.
A massive, high-energy spectacle. But again, you couldn't separate it from the politics. There was significant friction from the Maggie camp online regarding the choice of performers. Even the halftime show is a front in the culture war now.
Before we wrap up, I need to check the weird news desk. Pakistan has passed a new law that I think we need to discuss. The gutter law.
This is actually very serious. In the Punjab province, they have imposed a 10-year jail sentence for stealing manhole covers.
10 years. That seems incredibly draconian.
It does, until you realize the scale of the problem. People steal the heavy metal covers to sell for scrap. But then you have these open pits in the middle of the street. People fall in, children, motorcyclists, and they die. The government is essentially treating it as a form of manslaughter.
It's a tragic example of how poverty drives crime that then creates a huge public danger. And finally, a morgue scandal in Russia.
This one is gruesome. A hospital in St. Petersburg was caught selling body parts and tissues from the morgue for medical training purposes, all without the family's consent.
Just a complete breakdown of ethics.
Total corruption. It's a reminder that when institutions fail, they fail in some truly horrifying ways.
Okay. We've covered a lot of ground. From the lava tubes of Venus to the broken metals in Milan, from AI lawyers to Neolithic trophy hunters. What is the through line here? Connect the dots for us.
I keep coming back to that gap. We are living in an era of technological hyperacceleration. We're pivoting to the moon. We're engineering hydrogels that mimic life. We're creating autonomous digital agents. But underneath that shiny sci-fi veneer, we are still dealing with the same messy, ancient human problems.
We have the tech of gods, but the instincts of, well, Neolithic warlords.
Exactly. We're still fighting over territory. We are still dealing with corruption. We are stealing manhole covers. We are breaking our own metals. The hardware of civilization is upgrading at an incredible pace, but the software of human nature hasn't had a patch in 5,000 years.
And the stage we are playing on, the Earth itself, is changing right beneath our feet. The forests are moving. The tectonic plates are shifting the climate. We aren't just observers anymore. We are an active geological force. And we might not actually be in control of the machine we've built.
We're in the driver's seat, but I'm not sure we know how to steer.
That is the image I'm going to leave you with today. The invisible, perfect, smart skin on one hand and the snapped Olympic medal on the other. It's the gap between our ambition and our execution.
And that gap is where the most interesting human stories always happen.
Well said. That is it for today's deep dive. We hope you feel a little more prepared for the future and for the present. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Stay curious.
For enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
Welcome to the debate. It is Monday, February 9, 2026.
Good to be here.
So if you happen to glance at the financial tickers today, the ones scrolling in New York or London or Tokyo, you might be forgiven for thinking we've hit some kind of golden age of global stability. The Dow Jones just crossed 50,000 for the first time ever.
It's a historic number, certainly.
It is. The S&P, the NASDAQ, they're all rallying right along with it. The markets are, well, they're betting on a massive recovery, basically shrugging off all the volatility we saw last year. It is a party on Wall Street.
It is. 50,000, that creates a lot of optimism. It suggests capital is feeling very, very confident about what's coming next.
It does. But my argument today is that the stock market is currently the world's most expensive distraction. I mean, if you look away from the ticker tape and you look at an actual map of the world, the picture is it's radically different. We're not seeing stability. We are seeing a planet that is fracturing. And I would argue this fracture is more severe, maybe more dangerous than anything we saw in the mid-20th century. We are watching the tectonic plates of geopolitics just pull apart.
Yeah, and that's the fascinating contradiction of our moment, isn't it? You have capital screaming integration, profit, and growth, while the geopolitical reality is screaming fragmentation, conflict, and walls.
Exactly. And that is essential tension we really need to unpack today. My thesis is pretty simple. The global order is hardening into a rigid binary structure, a new Cold War, if you will. On one side, you have the United States and its allies, and they're consolidating their sphere of influence through economic warfare, through military integration. And on the other side, you have this revisionist Eurasian bloc digging in. That gray zone, that space where countries could sort of play the middle, it's disappearing. You're either in the system or you're out.
I see the headlines you're reading, and I get why that Cold War 2.0 narrative is so compelling. It's clean, it's binary. But I come at this from a different angle. I don't think we're seeing a clean split into two camps. I think what we're witnessing is the rise of a messy, transactional multipolarity. Nations are acting with ruthless pragmatism. They're playing both sides against the middle. They're prioritizing their own regional integration, their own economic survival, over any kind of loyalty to Washington or Beijing or Moscow. The old alliances are there, sure, but the behavior on the ground suggests national self-interest is just overriding that bloc mentality.
Well, that's a comforting thought that nations can just pick and choose from a buffet of alliances without consequence. But I think the evidence from just this past week suggests that window is slamming shut. Let's look at the hard data. The lines are being drawn clearer than ever. Take the new trade deal between the United States and India. We're seeing tariffs slashed to 18%. Prime Minister Modi is hailing this as great news.
It is a significant reduction, yeah, especially with the protectionist trends we've seen.
But pause on the why. This isn't just about cheaper consumer goods. This is a strategic pivot. By dropping those tariffs, Washington is effectively locking New Delhi into its economic orbit to counter the East. It's a membership fee for the Western Club. And look at Latin America. Argentina's President Javier Milei, he's not hedging his bets. He has signed a trade agreement with the U.S., but more tellingly, he is ceding control over military operations to U.S. forces in the Daga Atlantica exercise.
Okay, I think we need to be precise here. For listeners who might have missed that, the Daga Atlantica is a joint naval exercise, but usually these things are more ceremonial. This one is different because the terms are unusually integrative when it comes to command structures.
Exactly. It's not just ships sailing next to each other. This involves a level of command integration that, it effectively surrenders a degree of sovereignty for the sake of alignment. Milei is choosing a side. He is placing Argentina firmly under the American security umbrella. And at the exact same time, you have Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov explicitly pushing for a Eurasian partnership to counter Western pressure. The binary is real and it is hardening.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the binary is as solid as you claim. You mention India. Yes, they signed a trade deal with the U.S. That's the headline. But at the very same time, do you know where India's labor force is going? Russia. There are currently 70,000 Indian workers in Russia.
Labor flows are messy. They don't dictate state policy.
But it's not just messy, it's structural. Russia has a severe labor shortage. We're talking about a gap that could reach 3.1 million people by 2030. Moscow views India not as an enemy, but as a key partner for skilled labor, for construction, for pharmaceuticals. If India were truly locked into the Western bloc, like you say, why is its human capital literally building the Russian economy? Prime Minister Modi is shaking hands with the U.S. president on tariffs while his citizens are filling the gaps in the Russian workforce. That is the definition of transactional, not ideological.
I would argue that labor moves slower than policy, and eventually that security architecture creates a ceiling for that kind of cooperation.
Look at South Africa. They just signed the China-Africa Economic Partnership Agreement, or CAEPA. Why? Because it grants them duty-free access to the Chinese market. That's a massive economic incentive that the U.S. just isn't matching.
And at the same time, South Africa is withdrawing its troops from the UN mission in the DRC after nearly 30 years to focus on national defense. So they are disengaging from the Western-led international security architecture and engaging economically with Beijing. That is an ideology. That is just shopping for the best deal.
I would argue those are exceptions that prove the rule. But let's dig into the mechanics of this split. The primary tool we are seeing right now is the weaponization of energy and economics. This is where your whole transactional theory, I think, it really falls apart, because when the screws turn, nations are forced to submit. Look at Cuba. The Kremlin itself has explicitly stated that the fuel situation in Cuba is critical and accused the U.S. of suffocating the island.
It is certainly a siege.
It is an active siege designed to force political capitulation. The blockade is not a passive measure. And it's not just Cuba. Look at the Indian oil companies. I mean, despite the labor flows you just mentioned, Indian refiners are starting to shun Russian oil. Why? To avoid U.S. sanctions. The U.S. dollar and the threat of being cut off from it, that remains the ultimate stick.
So let's just clarify that for the audience. When we talk about the stick here, we're really talking about secondary sanctions.
Right. To put it simply, the U.S. doesn't just say American companies can't trade with Russia. They say to Indian companies or to Chinese companies, if you trade with Russia, you cannot bank with the United States. You get cut off from the dollar system.
The financial nuclear option.
Precisely. And when Washington threatens those secondary sanctions, the so-called pragmatism of the global South evaporates and they fall in line. We see this in Ukraine as well. After Russia's massive strike on the power grid, hitting the Bertynska and Dobrotrinska stations, Kiev had to issue a desperate plea for aid from Poland. Energy dependence forces you into the arms of your patrons. Ukraine needs the West just to keep the lights on. You can't be transactional when your grid is down.
That's a compelling argument regarding immediate crises. I'll give you that. When the lights go out, you call your friends. But have you considered the long-term structural changes that these pressures are creating? You say the dollar is the ultimate stick, but China is actively advising its financial institutions to limit purchases of U.S. bonds.
Which hurts their own portfolio.
In the short term, maybe, but let's explain the logic there. Buying U.S. bonds essentially means you're lending money to the U.S. government. By limiting those purchases, China is starting to decouple its financial safety nets from the American system. That is a defensive move against exactly the kind of leverage you're describing. If they hold fewer U.S. bonds, well, the U.S. has less leverage over their assets in a conflict. They are willing to take a hit on returns to buy sovereignty.
A defensive crouch is still an admission of the binary conflict.
Alternative, or it is the creation of alternatives. Look at Brazil. They aren't just sitting back and accepting the North-South dynamic. They've launched a program of 5 strategic routes for South American integration.
Building roads is hardly a revolution.
It is when those roads are designed specifically to bypass reliance on northern powers. They are building infrastructure to trade directly with their neighbors and global partners on their terms, bypassing the Atlantic shipping lanes dominated by NATO powers. Even in Venezuela, which you'd expect to be crushed by the sanctions you mentioned, the Attorney General is pushing an amnesty law to stabilize internal politics. They're framing their communal economy as a sovereign alternative to financial speculation. The pressure isn't just resulting in submission, it's resulting in the creation of parallel systems.
Parallel systems that are vastly inferior and isolated. You can build a communal economy all you want, but if you can't import semiconductors or advanced medicine because you're locked out of SWIFT, you are just managing decline. But let's look at where the rubber meets the road, the geopolitical realignment of the global South. You mentioned Brazil, but look at Bangladesh.
What about it?
Following the ouster of Sheikh Hasina, the interim government is rushing to finalize a trade pact with the United States just days before their general election. And they are doing this specifically to counter Chinese influence and because they are terrified of losing the American market. They are facing a binary choice and they are choosing the West. That's not a transaction. That's a lifeline.
I see that differently. Bangladesh is reacting to immediate tariff pressures. The U.S. dropped tariffs from 37% to 20% for partners, and they want to lock that in. It's survival, not ideological conversion. But if you want to talk about the West as some kind of unified bloc, we have to talk about what's happening in the Arctic.
The Arctic is a standard NATO theater.
Is it? France and Canada just opened consulates in Greenland.
Which is standard diplomatic expansion.
No, the reports are explicit. They opened those consulates specifically to counter U.S. pressure and threats regarding Greenland. These are NATO allies, France, Canada, and the U.S., and yet Paris and Ottawa feel the need to plant a flag and nuke to protect their interests against Washington.
Wait, are you suggesting France views the U.S. as a threat in the Arctic?
I'm suggesting that they view U.S. dominance as a threat to their own access to resources. That does not look like a unified Western bloc to me. It looks like competing interests within the so-called West. Even inside the tent, everyone is carrying a knife. The monolith you're describing, it has cracks all over it.
There will always be internal friction, but when the chips are down, they align. Look at Argentina again. Milei is moving away from hostile relations with Washington to full alignment just to boost agricultural exports. He's betting his entire recovery on the rules-based order. He sees where the power lies.
He sees where the market is, but markets shift. Look at Mexico. President Sheinbaum is focusing on the recovery of the welfare state. Now, that's a domestic priority that often clashes with the neoliberal expectations coming from Washington. She is prioritizing internal social stability over external market approval. And regarding your point on the rules-based order, that phrase it's losing its meaning. The U.S. State Department is reportedly funding free speech activists and MAGA-aligned think tanks in Europe to oppose the Digital Services Act.
Promoting free speech is a core Western value. You can't fault them for that.
Funding groups to fight against laws passed by democratically elected European parliaments. That is the U.S. meddling in the domestic affairs of its closest allies because American tech companies don't like the regulations. That breeds resentment, not loyalty. It proves that this isn't about some shared ideology. It's about American economic dominance. And that is what drives countries to hedge their bets.
I'm just not convinced by that line of reasoning because it ignores the existential nature of the threats we face. This isn't just about trade tariffs or digital regulations. We're entering a new era of competition in space and technology, and the lines there they're stark. This is the new Iron Curtain. Look at the space race. It is the U.S. versus China, vying for the moon. It is a zero-sum game for the strategic high ground.
Is it zero-sum, or is it just a massive business opportunity?
It's absolutely strategic. Look at the technology sector. The U.S. and China both opted out of the joint declaration on military AI use at the recent summit. Why? Because neither side is willing to tie its hands while the other develops autonomous weapons. That is the definition of a Cold War arms race. And then we have MethaneSat.
The satellite data?
Yes. This satellite revealed that methane emissions are 50% higher than reported globally. This is a tool of Western transparency that threatens opaque regimes who hide their environmental damage. Technology is becoming the arbiter of truth, and the revisionist powers cannot stand that.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. MethaneSat didn't just find leaks in Russia or Iran. It found massive, unreported emissions in the Permian Basin in Texas. Technology exposes everyone, not just the enemy. It makes these strict ideological narratives harder to maintain when your own backyard is leaking methane at record rates.
But the response to that data will differ vastly between democratic and authoritarian systems. We will debate the Texas data in Congress. Moscow will bury theirs.
Perhaps. But look at the drivers of this space race you mentioned. You paint it as US versus China, like Apollo versus Soyuz. But Elon Musk just announced SpaceX is pivoting to build a self-growing moon city within 10 years. And why? Because he wants to do an IPO. The driving force there isn't national glory or defeating communism. It's capital accumulation. It is market valuation.
Which is fueled by government contracts and national security imperatives. SpaceX doesn't exist without NASA and the Pentagon.
To an extent, sure. But look at Crypto.com buying AI.com for $70 million. Look at Reddit acquiring ad tech companies. This is private capital moving across borders, disrupting these state-centric models. The Dow hitting $50,000 is driven by these companies, not by the State Department. Money is transcending the blocks you are describing. Even with the military AI declaration you mentioned, the fact that both the US and China opted out actually puts them on the same side of that specific issue. They both want the freedom to weaponize AI. That's a convergence of interest, not a divergence.
A convergence on mutual destruction, perhaps. But we cannot ignore the security architecture. You look at the map and see flows of money. I look and I see walls going up. The NATO-Russia tension is at a breaking point. We have reports of a potential June deadline for peace talks. But in the meantime, Russia is launching massive retaliatory strikes on infrastructure.
The strikes are horrific, yes.
And in the Middle East, Israel's security cabinet is approving new rules to increase control over the West Bank. These are assertions of hard power. You cannot transact your way out of a military occupation or a missile strike. When the tanks roll, the trade deals stop mattering. The physical reality of land and security overrides the digital reality of capital flows.
You can't transact out of a missile strike, no. But the world is just too interconnected for a clean split to be sustainable. We have 70,000 Indian workers in Russia while their prime minister shakes hands with the U.S. president. We have French consulates in Greenland guarding against American overreach. We have U.S. funds fighting European laws. These allies are competitors, and these enemies are trading partners.
I see why you emphasize that complexity, but I believe those are temporary anomalies in a system that is rapidly correcting toward bifurcation. When the energy grid fails in Ukraine, they don't call a private equity firm. They call Poland and the U.S. government. When push comes to shove, the blocs define survival.
And I suppose we will see if that survival instinct leads to huddling in camps or building new bridges.
Indeed. And as we watch the Dow sit at 50,000 amidst all this chaos, perhaps the markets are betting that money will ultimately find a way around the walls politicians are building. But for now, the walls are getting higher.
And the tunnels underneath them are getting deeper.
That is all the time we have for today. We encourage you to look beyond the headlines of allies and enemies and to watch the flow of energy, labor, and capital.
It's rarely as simple as black and white.
See you next time on The Debate.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.